Hello, and welcome to School to Homeschool. I am Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of 6, and a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I have kids in their 20s all the way down to elementary age and everything in between. Are you thinking about pulling your kids from the school system like I did, but you're scared to death and don't know what to do next? My friends, I felt the same way, and you have come to the right place. I want to help your family leave the system so that you can take the hearts and minds of your children back. Hello, my friends, you brave souls. Welcome back. As I mentioned in my previous podcast, that our first day and week of homeschooling was awful. I mean, it was terrible. And up until the piano tuner came, which was humbling and eye-opening and all the things for me. So I had to take a step back, right? I had curriculums planned out, and I had gone and purchased all these curriculums, which, by the way, as I mentioned before, don't do that. Don't just go out and buy a bunch of curriculums. I asked people, I went online and was like, what curriculum should I get? There are thousands of curriculums to choose from, which can be intensely overwhelming and scary and all of the things. And I ended up spending an obscene amount of money trying to figure out and buy these curriculums, and that was not great. It was not smart. The money could have been used so much better elsewhere. So before you go out and start spending all this money on curriculums, there's a very important thing you need to do first. In the homeschooling world, it's called deschooling. I didn't do it at the beginning and I regretted it and then had to go back and do it. Now, deschooling is different than unschooling. Unschooling is a homeschooling philosophy, also called child-led learning. And we will talk about homeschooling philosophies in a future podcast and do a breakdown of the major ones. But today we're going to talk about deschooling, which is essentially, for a lack of a better term, it's detoxifying from the system or deprogramming from what we know. Now, most of you, if not all of you who are listening, went to public school or some form of a public school or a charter school. And by the way, people are always like, well, my child goes to a charter school. I'm like, my friends, it's the same thing, okay? Charter schools are publicly funded, and therefore they are under the same laws as public schools. They might have a little bit more freedom, but not a lot more freedom. And so it's essentially the same thing. Now, you have to understand something. In the last 3 years, I've spent an obscene amount of time studying about the history of our education system, which has made me physically, honestly sick. Because I didn't know that. Even as a teacher, I never learned those things. And we'll get into that more. But essentially, the short thing of it is that when our system was created, it was first implemented in 1852 by Horace Mann in the state of Massachusetts. Horace Mann did not have the public in his best interest. His kids continued to homeschool, but they needed a way to control the masses. And so they used a Prussian form of schooling, which is modern day Germany, to be able to control the masses, to do what they were told. And that's the system that they adopted. I wish in my heart of hearts, I felt like, man, I wish that it was noble in their hearts of why they put public school into place. But the more that I learned, the more it seems that it was a little bit sinister and they did it for themselves. The legislators who pushed public schooling did not do it for the best interest of those in school or these other children. They did it for the interest of their kids, to help their kids continue to be elitists. The fascinating thing is, up until 1852, when we start seeing public schools popping up, families would educate their kids at home. They used the New England Primer, which was established in the late 1600s, and it was biblically based. There was a law that was implemented, the the old Deluder of Satan Act of, I think it was like 1688, where if a town had 50 families or more, they were expected to hire a teacher together as a community and so that they could educate the kids for a few hours each day on reading, writing, and the Bible. The Puritans believed that if children studied the Bible, it would help them become better people, and they needed to learn to read so that they could study the Bible and stay close to God. And it would prepare them to go to Harvard, which was established in the late 1600s. Okay. Then we go through the 1700s. Again, people are homeschooling, or they have small little community schools that are set up, but nothing is government run. And my friends, let's be honest, the government is not great at running anything. But in 1852, we start getting, and by the way, the literacy rate in the United States, the colonies, and then eventually the United States, was incredibly high. And since then, since the advent of public schooling, we have only seen a decline in the literacy rate in our children, okay, which is terrifying. And the more that I've gotten into it, I'm like looking at the literacy rates, I'm looking at everything and all these things that have been implemented. And you go, oh, wow, we are in a fast decline, and it's continuing. It's not getting better. Okay. So homeschooling has always been around, and parents have been very, very capable. But in 1852 is the first time that we start to see a government run or a compulsory school. Okay. So, by the way, if you want a really great book to read, or a couple great books, Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto, and The Weapons of Mass Instruction, also by John Taylor Gatto, who is a 30-year veteran teacher, New York State Teacher of the Year, and 2 times New York City Teacher of the Year. And he talks about the history of education and what he learned and how he felt like he needed to rectify his years of teaching through helping people leave the system. So fascinating. Okay, but what does that have to do with deschooling? So let's talk about this. We have been in a system. I went to a public school. I became a public school teacher. I only knew one way to do things. The teacher stood up, taught things, and then we did what the teacher said and got a grade for it. We jumped through the teacher's hoops and got a grade. We had class after class after class after class, which I always wondered, even as a teenager, I was like, why do I have to take certain classes? Like, I am totally not interested in this thing. Like, why do I need to learn quadratic equations when I know I am not going to be an engineer? I'd much rather learn how to do taxes because I see my parents doing taxes. So every year during quadratic equation season, I'm so glad I learned them. Just kidding. That's a joke. But why don't we learn taxes? Why don't we learn the things that we're going to be using? Right? I ask that question often. And my parents often didn't know what to do with me because I'm like, why do I have to do this? I don't get it. But I did. I jumped through the hoops like many of you. But that's the system that I knew. And then I put my kids in school like everybody else when they were of age, and they go through the system. So what we know in our brains is this is how you do school. You have subjects that are separated from all the other subjects. They're not really entwined. And we go from subject to subject to subject, and we need to learn math, science, history, reading, and writing. And then everything else is extra, right? I also asked myself, who chose those subjects? Who said these are the subjects you need to learn? But if you read any Jane Austen, it talks, she talks in her books about a well-accomplished lady being good at embroidery and languages. And I think, well, okay, so who in the culture decides what we learn about? And again, we go back to that Prussian model of they said, this is what you're going to learn, and you're going to work in factories, and you need to know how to obey rules and do what you're told. And we're going to tell you what to think, how to think, when to think, and what subjects you're going to study about. And then we get these kids going into colleges going, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Well, of course not, because they've been told their whole lives what they will study and what they will spend their time doing. Okay, so deschooling. Because we are used to that system, we have to unlearn and relearn a new way. and honestly, a better way. This deschooling tends to be the hardest for parents. So I forewarn you, you're going to have a harder time deschooling than your children. So what is it? Well, you're deprogramming yourself of what you think education should look like to other forms and ways to learn, other philosophies to learn. So that's what deschooling is. It's deprogramming yourself and then having to reprogram that there is a different way and, frankly, a more efficient and much better way to learn. I was really scared. Again, at the beginning, when I first started homeschooling, I bought all these curriculums. I bought science curriculums and math curriculums and reading and writing and all these things. What I wish I had done was just take a breath and say, okay, at the beginning, we're just going to do maybe Khan Academy, which is free, and we're going to feel out things. Just to see what you like. You're going to have to rediscover what your kids love and what they don't love. And yes, you still can teach all those subjects, but there's a better way to teach them without having to teach curriculums. And by the way, they're boring. And kids, if you talk to kids by 5th grade, most of them don't like school anymore. And they see school as a chore and a burden when learning is powerful. And really, people do love to learn, but they want to learn the subjects that they want to, right? So this is how you're going to deschool. Okay, you've got to detoxify from the system. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take a deep breath, and you as a parent are going to start reading about education. Okay, I know that's a lot to ask. Audible is your friend, or any other audiobook, they are your friends, but they're going to help you see other ways to learn and other ways to think that, again, are far superior to what is happening in our schools. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to start reading with your children. Now, most of you probably read with them when they were little, and you read the Sandra Boynton books, and you read Dr. Seuss books, and you read all of these books to your kids. As I've been learning, one of the most powerful ways to increase literacy in children is reading to them, even into teenage years. Because what happens is, even though they're not reading the words themselves, they're hearing the story and able to decode the sentences, as well as hear great sentence structure and all of those things. So you're going to start reading to your kids every day. Now, when we started, we call it read aloud in the homeschooling world. When I started reading to my kids, we couldn't get through 3 minutes. Like, that's all my kids would handle. I started with some picture books, and they liked the picture books, right? Even the teenagers were like, oh, this is, picture books are always fun. They're fun for me as an adult, right? They're fun. You read to them, and it's great. It was when we started reading chapter books that my kids were like, can we be done now? 3 minutes is all I got with them. And they were like, are we done? Is this over? Or this is done. Are we finished? Can we be finished? And crazy thing is, the longer we went and the more we got into the story, and it had to be a good story, the more we got into the story, the longer the kids started wanting me to read. Now, my 7-year-old will listen to 2 hours easily of a story. Now, I started buying books on Audible, or like audiobooks, or checking them out from the library. Library is your friend, by the way. Don't, like, when you need curriculum, something like that, spend time at the library. It's an amazing resource. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. Just go to the library. So if you're like, I don't know what to do. Library, my friends, the library is your best friend. So my 7-year-old now will listen to a book for 2 hours. And because I can't read for 2 hours at a time, because like you, I have a busy life and lots of kids and things to do, using audiobooks has become our friend. I still do read to them myself, but we also listen in the car. We listen any chance we can get, and my kids really love it. Best books to start with are classics. I actually prefer classics over other books just because they're time tested. I love putting my kids face to face with greatness, and so that they can live vicariously through these characters and build character as these characters make choices. So the first thing you're going to do is start reading aloud with your kids. A great book to start with, Charlotte's Web, even with teenagers. My kids cried the last time we read Charlotte's Web. I cried like a baby when Charlotte died. By the way, sorry, did I just give that away? Yeah, spoiler alert, Charlotte dies. Another great one, especially for boys, Where the Red Fern Grows. It's an old classic. I know all of you have read it. If you haven't, you need to read it. So start with really rich literature and start by reading aloud every day. Now, if you're really worried about math and writing, then something that you can do is go on Prodigy for little kids. You can have them start doing Prodigy and work with them just for a few minutes a day. On Prodigy, you can also have them do Khan Academy, which is free. My teenager said, I actually would like a curriculum. So I got teaching textbooks for him, which is an online program. It does cost money, but he said, I'd really like to learn algebra online rather than in a book. So that's what I got for him. He was shocked in that he came out, he went in 45 minutes later, he came out and because he felt like he needed to do something, right? So, because again, that public school part of him is like, you have to do something. So he came out and went, oh, wow, I finished in 45 minutes what it would have taken our class 3 months to do. And I said, of course you did, because you are at the mercy of the slowest person in the class, period. And schools try to, quote, differentiate. That means tailor learning to the person, but they can't. Not when I had 150 students, a semester, it's pretty stinking hard to differentiate no matter how hard you try. And kudos to the teachers that try, but the reality is you're able to differentiate as a parent and let them go as fast or as slow as they need to without being beholden to the slowest child in the classroom. Because my guess is the slowest child is, one of your younger kids. Okay. So first thing that you're going to do to de-school is every day you're going to start reading aloud. Okay. That's the very first thing you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to start playing games with them. You might play board games, various games. Kids and teenagers love games. They love strategy games. So if you can start playing games with them, reading aloud, that's how you're going to start. You're going to let them sleep when they need to sleep. Sometimes you can still have a schedule, right? You're not going to do a free-for-all necessarily and say, okay, you can have screen time all day, every day. But you're trying to get out of the idea that in order to learn, you have to read from a book and I have to tell you what to study. But again, there's that need for a crutch at the very beginning where you're like, I've got to do something. So again, you're going to say, we're going to read aloud. And then every day, if you need to do some math, we've got Prodigy, we've got Khan Academy, brilliant.org if they're in pre-algebra or higher, also free. We're going to just do 10 or 15 minutes. That's all. And then you're going to have them write something every day. Every day, you're going to have them copy a passage out of a book. If you're religious, maybe you have them copy a scripture from your sacred text. You might choose the book that you're reading and say, hey, I want you to copy this paragraph. If they're younger, you're going to say, hey, let's have you copy this sentence. And this is what a sentence is. And every day, you're just going to copy a little bit. So they're still practicing the writing and they're still seeing good writing and good literature. And the next thing that you're going to do, and this is where it gets really fun, because again, we want to make learning fun for them again, because by 5th grade, learning has ceased to be fun. It's become a chore. You're going to start having experiences with them. You're going to go on field trips. You're going to go on hikes. You might watch some documentaries with them. I have a child, my 16-year-old is obsessed with business. He's an entrepreneurial spirit. The kid got a job at 14 on his own and saved up money, bought his own car, bought his own keyboard, even though we have a piano, and he saved that money on his own. So we found this documentary called The Men Who Built America about, the titans of industry. Loved it. He loved watching it. Didn't necessarily love all the people in it. There's you look at Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller and you go, okay, well, you did some great stuff. And then what the heck were you thinking? Anyway, so watch documentaries with them. You might watch some YouTube videos. I started going to farmers markets and asking the local vendors, like, hey, could you come and show my kids how to make soap? I found a couple other families that were homeschooling and said, hey, do you want to get together like a couple Fridays a month with all of our kids and start making soap and things like that? Start like doing activities together so that my kids have friends. And we're going to talk about how, socialization and finding your peer group and your tribe and all that in a future podcast. But for me, I was looking for people who were like us. My kids, it is lonely. And I forewarn you, it's kind of scary and it's lonely. But we found a group together and I found somebody to come teach my kids how to make soap. She brought all the materials. We divided up the cost. I think it cost us $14 per family for a loaf of handmade soap. And she taught my kids the chemistry behind the soap and working with the lye and everything. And the kids all had goggles on. She came to my house and I found her at a farmer's market. She brought in stuff for the kids to put into their soap. And 2 hours of pure gold science without it being boring. And we had kids there as young as 3 and then kids as old as, 14. And they loved it. All of them were just completely mesmerized, kind of like with the piano tuner, with real life watching. It's right in front of their face and it's relevant to them because we all use soap. I took them I called a local baker and said, hey, you're a sourdough specialist. Could my kids come and learn about sourdough from you? And he's like, you bet. He was actually really honored that we came. And so he spent 2 hours with us. I was expecting like 15 minutes, but he was ecstatic and excited to share his craft that he had been doing for 25 years, teaching us about sourdough and sourdough starters and all these things. I called another farm that said, hey, after your season, can we come and pick some tomatoes and buy some tomatoes from you guys? And they're like, absolutely. So I took my kids to a tomato farm. We went on hikes. We started visiting museums and it wasn't expensive. We just I had to reach out and get creative. One of the things I haven't done yet, but I want to do is take my kids to a bank and have them meet with the bank president and talk to the bank president about how a bank works and what that looks like. So there's all these opportunities. You as a parent just have to make a couple calls and say, hey, would you be willing to do this? And by the way, farmers markets, if you want to do hands-on things like milking cows and things like that, I've talked to tons of families at farmers markets that are like, yeah, you could come to our farm. My kids went to this one family's farm, come on over and see how we, collect the eggs and how we milk the goats and, all the things so that we can make our soaps or make our lotions or whatever. And those are real life experiences and it didn't cost us anything. Another thing I did is my kids were really interested in a metalworking class. And so I was like, okay, this does cost a little bit of money, but this is a really cool thing. And so I signed them up for this bladesmithing and blacksmithing class. And so they'd go once a week for 3 hours and they would bladesmith and they would blacksmith. And it was really, really cool. So the morning time we'd wake up. So this was our day. We'd wake up in the morning. We'd make breakfast together, which we stopped doing a long time ago because everyone had to leave at different times. One child had to be at school by 7:45. The next child had to be there at 8. The next one had to be there at 8:15. Yay for dropping off at, being a taxi and dropping off all at different times. And then they'd be picked up, at 2:45, 3, and 3:15. But this way, my kids were able to sleep. We'd wake them up. We'd have breakfast together. We'd read together. I'd have them do a little bit of math, a little bit of writing. For us, religion is a very important part of our lives. So we do sacred text study and scripture study. And then And then at that point, we'd go, okay, this week, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go on a little daycation today, and we're going to go visit this museum, or we're going to go visit the living farm that we have here in town that's still open, or we're going to go to this museum or the money museum or that museum. The cool thing is when you homeschool, nothing's ever busy. So you kind of have free reign. We went to the Space Discovery Center one day, and often there's homeschool prices, which are cheaper. And we went to the Space Discovery Center, and we were the only people there. When kids go for field trips, they have tons and tons and tons of kids there. But when we went, we were the only people there. And they gave my kids like extra stuff and posters and spent extra time sharing stuff with them and did little extra presentations for them. And so when you homeschool, the world opens up and opportunities open up. The other thing is 2 of my kids played instruments, piano and my daughter played violin, my son played cello, and they were already taking private lessons, but we were able to do the lessons at a different time of day, which was kind of awesome. Like I was like, oh, can we do it at 11 o'clock on Mondays? And the teacher's like, oh, that would be awesome because our after school times fill up. And so we started focusing on, okay, what are the things that you love? Let's get our things done in the morning. We got our scripture study done. We've got our little handwriting done. I did buy some handwriting books that I didn't put away. Everything else I put away. Most of the curriculums I put away. But I pulled out the handwriting book, and they do handwriting, or they do copy work and copy a passage from a book. We do some scripture study. They do a little bit of math. We were done within an hour with official work. And then we moved on to unofficial work, which was still powerful learning. Now, in most states, you have a requirement that you have to do so many hours of learning a day. What I learned was that doesn't have to be in your seat doing book work. It's pretty awesome when you take your kids, like we have this place called Glen Erie Castle in Colorado Springs, which was built in the 1800s by General Palmer, who founded Colorado Springs, our city. And so we went and toured Glen Erie Castle. And guess what? All of that time counts as schooling. With the time that we would watch documentaries counted as schooling. My son picked up the guitar. He bought, one of my older kids had a guitar, and he bought the guitar from his brother. And this actually started during COVID. He started playing the guitar, watching YouTube videos. And so he would practice and practice and practice and practice for hours. And when we started, quote, schooling in August, he would say, Mom, can I have some time just to work, play with my guitar? And I'm like, okay, yeah, you betcha. Again, this is after the nightmare first week of schooling when I was like, oh, there is a different way to learn. I better de-school the kids, right? Let them know you don't have to have a strict schedule to learn. And so he started playing the guitar. In the following November, he said, can I please have guitar lessons? And so I called around, I found a guitar teacher. By the end of the year, by the end of the school year, I guess I should say, he was doing so well on the guitar that the guitar teacher said, look, he's far more advanced than any of the other kids I teach. I'm going to have to refer you to another teacher because it's as far as I can take him. And yet the bulk of his learning was on YouTube at the beginning, my friends, on YouTube. The same happened with my now 11-year-old and the piano. My son can play some really hard pieces. He took piano lessons for a long time, refused to practice. And then I was like, I'm not paying for piano lessons if you're not going to practice. And this is not a battle worth fighting anymore. We stopped taking piano lessons, and he started practicing different songs that he wanted to play on YouTube. And people ask me, they're like, who's your piano teacher? He's so good. He knows the basic form. He knows how to read music because he did take for 2 years, but he wouldn't practice. And it wasn't until I allowed him the freedom that he was able to really explode. Now, another thing that you can do is and this sounds counterintuitive, but really listen to me, hear me out. And I talk to moms about this all the time. Have your kids sit down at the very beginning and say, I need you to make a list of all the things that you love about school. Now I need you to make a list of everything that you did not like about school. That could include, I didn't like that I had to sit in my seat all day. I didn't like the fact that I had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. I didn't like the fact that I had to learn certain subjects that I didn't want to learn, and I'd have to spend an hour learning those things. Or I didn't like the fact that when I went to the cafeteria as a middle schooler, that I felt like I had no friends, or it was awkward, and or I didn't like that I was bullied, or I didn't like this, that, or the other. It depends on the child. What did they not like? Okay. Now, I want you to make a list of things that you wish you could learn, things that you'd love to learn about. And then you take that list of things that they'd love to learn about. And for some kids, it'll take them a while because they're not used to being asked what they want to learn about. They're not. Then you take that list and you go, okay, now we're going to the library and let's find out about some of these subjects and pick out some books about this subject. Okay, let's go on some field trips about this. And so during this time, you're allowing the freedom to start learning about things that they love to learn. Again, I always kept just a little bit of structure at the beginning with the deprogramming and the deschooling, just because I needed it and I felt like my kids needed it. So that's what we did to deschool. And then slowly we started adding subjects of their interest. My now 11-year-old really enjoys science. And so he's like, Mom, I want to learn more science. And so I'd get books from the library. I started researching fun curriculums, although he doesn't necessarily love curriculums, but I found like Mystery Science, for example, mysteryscience.com has little lessons that they can do. There's some that are online and others that you do with them. Then I started adding things back that were important and relevant. Now, I know you're worried going, yeah, but what if they don't stay at grade level? Oh my gosh, what if they don't get to grade level? And what about all the legalities? We're going to get to the legalities in the States in a future podcast. For now, don't worry about grade levels. Don't worry if they're going to be above, behind or ahead. I promise, ultimately they'll be ahead. But you've got to let go of that. And you're going to need to start reading yourself. So the homeschool rule of thumb is for every year that they are in school or were in school, it will take at least a month to deschool them. So for me, I was like, we don't have that kind of time to waste because I have a, almost 14-year-old. He's about to turn 14 and he's about to go into high school. But again, I learned the hard way. It is real, it is legitimate, and you do have to deschool them. As I mentioned before, you're going to have to deprogram yourself first. And that's the hardest thing because we have it in our heads that in order to be successful, our kids have to be at grade level, and then we have to prepare them, and then they have to go to college, and then they have to do this, and then they have to do this, and classes need to be like this, and they need to learn math and science first, and then everything else, and they need to, and it becomes very overwhelming. Start reading books about homeschooling. Start reading books about our education system. It'll help you to see a different way. There are resources, and I'll be perpetually updating resources on my website. If you haven't watched the TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson on how schools kill creativity, start with that. It's the most watched TED Talk in the history of TED Talks. And it's brilliant. That's the first thing you're going to start with. It's easy. It's 20 minutes. Okay, watch that one. Again, I'll have links on my website, school2homeschool.com, that you can look up and look at the different resources to find like, okay, what do I start with? Some other things that you're going to need to know. Again, we'll get into legalities in another podcast, but there's some things you need to prepare yourself for that I wasn't expecting when I started homeschooling. I find a lot of parents who are leaving the public school system go through this. You might find yourself going through the grief cycle and you might cry a little bit, and it's very real, and allow yourself to feel those feelings. You might grieve the fact that you don't have time alone or perceive time alone. when in actuality, you're exchanging that 8 hours of free time with a much closer relationship to your children. And it's real. And especially when you start playing games with them and reading with them. And with the reading with them, it doesn't have to be long each day. You just do it a little bit each day, and you start playing games with them, and you start going, to museums. And don't even worry about having curriculums, by the way, at the museum, or having like printouts at the museum. Just go and enjoy the museum just for fun. You go and enjoy it for fun. What happens is the family gets closer, and you as a parent start seeing your children in a different way, and it's beautiful. But you have to be ready to go, oh my gosh, I'm grieving the time that I expected to have by myself once I put my my last one in kindergarten. That shocked me. That surprised me. I went through grieving experiences going, my kids will not experience these fun things that everyone else does in our neighborhood with the school, with this activity or that activity. They won't be doing the senior sunrise. They may not ever go to a prom. That was the initial grief cycle. And I legitimately went through grief about that until I learned, oh, wait, there are homeschool proms, and there's other things that replace those activities that are far superior, far more fun. And you're not really missing out on anything. But I had that fear of missing out, like, oh my gosh, there's grief about this. I started having feelings of failure. And I hear this from stay-at-home moms, homeschool moms all the time, where it's, oh my gosh, I'm failing my kids. I'm doing terrible. Today was a terrible day, and everyone was grumpy, and nobody wanted to do anything, and everyone complained. And we did go to the museum, and this child had a meltdown, and that kid did this. And there are days that are going to be hard, and you have to be allow yourself to have hard days. It's not going to be like the people you see on Instagram and Pinterest. It will not be. And they're not realistic anyway, because those people also have hard days, but they're only showing the great days. I mean, some of them will show hard days. I show my hard days. I do. Like Mother's Day last year, when I recorded myself coming out of church and my kids were screaming and hitting each other in the car. And I'm like, happy Mother's Day, everybody. Right? That's the reality. But you have to be okay with your house is going to sometimes be messy. More often than not. You don't have to let the kids watch all TV all day. You can put limits on them. It's okay. You have to understand your kids are not going to end up in therapy because you pulled them from school, and they're not going to be dumb. And you might have those feelings like, oh my gosh, I'm failing my kids. They're going to be in therapy. They're going to be stupid. It appears like these public school kids are having so much fun, and my kids are awful, right? You're going to have those days, and know that you're doing great, and that your kids are going to be fine, and they're going to learn. Your job is to help facilitate the learning, not be their teacher per se. We're going to talk about, again, in the future, about curriculums, about different homeschooling methodologies, and setting up what you want and you envision for your family. Because when I started doing that and went, okay, this is my vision for my family and really what I want, that's when beauty really started to happen. And I started letting go of, okay, these are the expectations that society has on me. This is what I want, and I'm going to let go of those expectations. What I've found is the more that people get into homeschooling, the more that the mothers and the fathers start questioning the system and other things as well. I started asking myself, why does everyone sign up for soccer? My kids don't particularly like soccer. So why did I sign them up for this? Why do I sign them up for soccer and then t-ball and then swimming and then this and then this? I mean, swimming, yes, I want my kids to swim and not drown. But why do we overbook our kids? I started questioning things, going, or is there a different, better way? Do I need to allow my kids more free time to play? Do I need to go against the grain a little bit? So expect that. And you'll find a lot of homeschooling parents are like, nope, we're okay not marching to the beat of everyone else's drum. But at the beginning, you're going to feel that pressure, oh, no, I need to be like everybody else. And now I'm grieving the fact that I'm not like everyone else. Allow yourself that. The other thing that you're going to have to get used to is ignoring well-intended, ignorant people. That might include grandparents or parents who say, oh my gosh, you're ruining your kids. What about them being socialized? What about math? What about this? And you just smile and say, hey, we're doing what's best for our family. Homeschooling is becoming more and more typical than it used to be. So I'm finding I don't hear that as much anymore. But the reality is people are still idiots and they still ask. Like, what about socialization? Okay, well, we can talk about that. How about the suicide rate in schools? Like how about the depression rate that high school students are going through? How about anxiety? Let's talk about that, okay? No, but again, we'll talk in the future about that as well. So you'll have to be okay with ignoring stupid people. And don't worry about your kids being weird homeschoolers. Again, we're going to talk about socialization here in an upcoming episode. But know that your kids are going to be okay, but there are some magical things that are going to happen for you. You're going to see your kids in a new light. They will come to like each other, especially as you're spending time with them. Are they still going to squabble and fight? You betcha. But there's a closeness that happens when families homeschool that I was not anticipating. I certainly wasn't anticipating it for my kids. I wasn't anticipating it for myself. And then when it started to magically unfold, as I talked to other homeschoolers, I found this to be typical, that the more time that they spent together and going on field trips together, it became a really beautiful thing. So again, back to deschooling. You're going to read aloud with your kids. You're going to play games with your kids. You're going to spend time at the library with your kids, and you're going to go on field trips, quote unquote, field trips with your kids. Or you can call them daycations and say, hey, today we're going to do this, and we're going to go tour the Museum of Mining and Industry today, and it's going to be so fun. Or we're going to the pumpkin patch today, and maybe we're going to pick up some books from the library about the pumpkin patch, or we're going to watch a documentary about, bees. And I called a local beehive and we're going to go visit an apiary. But it's a chance to have fun. And my friends, it legitimately is fun. And it's fun as a parent to do that. If you're limited on time, then you do it with the time that you've got. And then the rest of the day, you say, hey, kids, this is what we're going to do. The rest of the day, you can work on XYZ. And as a parent, you get to pick that. You get to help them decide that together. You're not beholden to a system telling you what you will and will not do. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I wish you the very best of luck. The very first thing that you need to do, my friends, is you need to start deschooling. Again, you as a parent need to start reading about our education system and about homeschooling philosophies. Start with Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk. Does school kill creativity? And then go from there, and then start having fun with them. You can also start cooking with them, by the way. My kids have become really good cooks since we started homeschooling. So start having fun with your babies. It's time. Again, we want you to take the hearts and the minds of your kids back.